The old man sighed as he gently lifted the blank canvas into place. Paintings were scattered all around the room. Some were so great in size, others were as small as notebook paper. Each painting was different in many ways, but each had one thing in common: detail. The life of the paintings were so real, colorful, and full of life. Hours were spent on each and every one, and that you could definitely tell. He brushed his beard as he reached for a set of paints. Each color seemed so plain at first, but before long, those plain colors would be mixed by him into a color unmatched by anything you have ever seen. He smiled lightly and painted some color to the canvas. A nurse stepped into the room and placed her hand on the old man's shoulder. "It's a boy. He's 5 pounds and 5 ounces." She smiled at the news she had just given. For someone looking from the outside, you'd say the old man wasn't too surprised. In a way, he wasn't. For some reason, he just knew. The glimmer in his eyes, though, showed a happiness that was far greater than one could match. The nurse took her leave. He smiled and began his painting. 12 years flew by almost too fast. The newborn baby had grown into a young boy. He was a smart boy, loved by many, and his enemies were few. He had a heart that was so big and full of love and care. He was always open to those around him. "Still working on that painting, I see?" He walked into the familiar room that was full of paintings. Still sitting in the same place was the old man. He never left that place. Always sitting there, always painting. "You've been working on that for how many years now?" The old man chuckled a bit as he stroked his beard. 12 years and 3 months exactly." The boy knew the painting had begun the day he was born, but he still never understood why it was taking him so long to complete it. He pushed the thoughts back and took a seat next to the old artist. He sat and he watched. The old man just smiled and continued painting. Tears streamed down the young man's face. Today was his 17th birthday, a joyous occasion, one would say. For him, there was nothing joyous about it. A birthday is supposed to be a celebration of another year of life. To him, it was nothing more than another year past, a possible promise of another year lying ahead, a year full of promised struggles. Where had he gone wrong? He steadied his breath and his eyes pinned down the hall. Thoughts of all his failures flooded his mind, tears filled his eyes. Where was his life going? How could he have let it get this far? How could he even have a future left? He pulled himself together as he entered the familiar room of paintings. As always, the old man was sitting there painting away. Still, he hadn't left. Still, he continued painting on the same canvas as before. This time, instead of looking at the painting in wonder, the young man looked at the painting with detest. Or maybe it was confusion. His feelings were mixed. Where are you going with this? The painting was beautiful, but now it's ugly. The old man took no offense to this statement. Instead, he simply smiled at the young man. "How can you call something ugly if it is unfinished?" For a short moment, the boy thought of his mistakes again. This brought the tears, and the tears brought the anger. His hands formed fists, and he stormed from the room. His anger wasn't towards the old man, but only towards himself. The old man's eyes had hints of sorrow in them, sorrow for the boy. He stroked his beard with a knowingness in his eyes. He then just smiled and continued painting. 8 years had passed since the boy's 17th birthday. Those 8 years were some of the hardest the boy had ever faced. Every night was a struggle, and each struggle was harder than the one before. It seemed like the cycle would never end. It felt like his life was going nowhere. To him, he thought of his life as ugly. 8 years, and the young man had grown into an adult. The once habitual nights of turmoil seemed only but a dream to him now. The chaos had gone, and in its place stood someone stronger. The once unfamiliar and feared future was now being lived to the fullest. He was happy, strong, and his sorrow was gone. He entered that same familiar room. As expected, the old man was busy painting away. "I guess you were right." He smiled at the beautiful canvas in front of him. "I called it too soon. This painting is beautiful. I don't know how you did it. Before it was so ugly, but now—" He took a moment to gather his words. "This is the most beautiful thing I have seen." The old man chuckled that same kind way he always did. He turned to a boy with a smile. You're talking as though as that the painting is done. I have much more in plan for this work of art." The boy looked at the old man, then at the painting. "But it's so beautiful. What more could be added?" The old man simply smiled. "So much more is to be added." The boy smiled back, then took his leave. The old man turned to the beautiful canvas and continued painting. Many years went by. The once young boy who stood in awe of the artist in his painting was now an old man. His body was no longer youthful and his hair had grown thin. His skin was now thick and wrinkly and his bones were weak. Inside, his heart was still the same. His memories still were there. His mind still remembered. He drew in a breath as he stared up from the hospital bed. He wasn't sure how much time he had left. He thought back to his childhood, his failures and his accomplishments. He thought back to that one unsure summer, the summer of his 17th birthday. He remembered how ill-fated he thought his future would be. His downfalls were just the lessons taught, lessons to teach him how to get back up. Back then, he just didn't see the big picture. He smiled to himself again. The ugliness of his life was nothing more than the beginning of a paint stroke. That beginning stroke just hadn't been finished yet. That night, he breathed his last breath. The old artist smiled at the canvas before him. Never had he seen something so beautiful, something so unique in its own way. He cleaned his paintbrush and sat back with a smile on his face. He saw that it was good. He lifted the painting and hung it on the wall with all the others. Then he sighed gently and lifted a blank canvas into place. Joy filled his eyes as the cry of an infant was heard. The old man closed his eyes, smiled, and began painting.